Have you ever felt uneasy in a situation but ignored your gut? The Levite in Judges 19 did, and the consequences were devastating. This story hits close to home because it's about the dangers of compromise and the cost of silence.
The Levite and his concubine began their journey back to his home in Ephraim, a trip that should have been ordinary. The concubine had left him before, returning to her father's house in Bethlehem, and this history lingered between them. There was no resolution, no healing, just the uneasy truce of reconciliation without repair. When they stopped at her father's house, they were greeted with excessive hospitality. The father pressed them to stay, first one day, then another, until 3 days had passed. Each morning, he argued, "Eat something, drink, stay a little longer." The Levite hesitated but didn't refuse. He let courtesy outweigh caution. Hospitality in ancient Israel wasn't just kindness, it was an obligation, a sacred duty. To reject it could insult the host, but accepting it blindly could trap you in danger. The father's insistence wasn't just warm-heartedness, it was controlling. The Levite felt the weight of the delay, the sun burning later in the day, but he said nothing. He ignored the tightening knot in his stomach. Research shows people dismiss gut feelings when social pressure mounts, when politeness feels safer than honesty. The Levite was more afraid of offending than of the risk ahead. By the time they left, the sun was low. The roads at dusk were dangerous. Bandits lurked in shadows, and cities known for violence were best avoided after dark. The servant urged them to stay in Gibeah, but the Levite refused. He insisted on pushing forward, determined to reach an Israelite city instead. Pride, urgency, stubbornness, whatever drove him, he ignored the practical warnings. They arrived in Gibeah as night fell. Gibeah was a city of Benjamin, part of Israel, but its reputation was already dark. No one came out to welcome them. In a culture where travelers depended on hospitality for survival, silence was a warning. They sat in the square, exposed, until an old man from Ephraim, another outsider, finally took them in. The relief was short-lived. Inside the house, the Levite likely ate with his host, answering questions about his journey while unease thickened the air. Then the sound came, shouting, pounding at the door. The men of the city surrounded the house, demanding the Levite be handed over. Their intent was unmistakable. The host, panicked, offered his own virgin daughter and the concubine instead. The Levite remained silent. He had ignored the delay at Bethlehem, ignored the late departure, ignored the danger of Gibeah. Now, faced with violence, he let the concubine be pushed outside. The text doesn't say she fought or screamed. It doesn't say anything about her at all. That's the horror. Her silence in the narrative mirrors her powerlessness in the moment. By morning, she was on the doorstep, her fingers curled against the threshold, like she had tried one last time to crawl back inside. The Levite told her, "Get up, let's go." She didn't move. He loaded her body onto his donkey and left Gibeah behind. What could have been a simple detour to Gibeah, what could have been an early departure from Bethlehem, none of it had to happen. But every small compromise, Every ignored warning led here. History remembers Gibeah as a symbol of Israel's moral collapse. But it began with one man's refusal to act when he still had time. The story doesn't start with violence. It starts with a man who had every chance to turn back and walked forward anyway. The men of Gibeah surrounded the house as they finished eating. They pounded on the door and demanded the old man hand over the Levite. The text doesn't say why, only that their intent was clear. This wasn't a random act. It echoed another story, the destruction of Sodom. But in Sodom, the angels struck the mob blind. Here, there were no miracles. The host panicked. He offered his own virgin daughter and the concubine instead. "Do what you want with them," he said, "but don't harm this man." The Levite said nothing. Moral decay doesn't happen overnight. It starts with small choices, looking away, staying silent. The men of Gibeah had reached a point where they saw nothing wrong with their demands. The old man too was complicit. He didn't resist, he bargained. His offer wasn't protection, it was sacrifice. The concubine had no voice in the text, no words, no reaction. She was pushed outside, and the door closed behind her. Theological scholars point to Gibeah as a turning point in Judges. Israel had no king, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. But deeper than political chaos was spiritual rot. The people knew the law, knew right from wrong, yet tolerated evil in their midst. The men of Gibeah weren't outsiders, they were Israelites, part of the covenant. Their actions revealed how far the nation had fallen. Modern parallels are unsettling. How often do people witness injustice and do nothing? How often is suffering ignored because speaking up is too costly? The concubine's fate wasn't just the result of the mob's violence, it was the result of collective indifference. The Levite could have refused to leave her. The old man could have refused to open the door. The other villagers could have intervened, but no one did. The text doesn't describe what happened outside. It only says the men abused her all night. At dawn, she crawled to the threshold and collapsed. Her hand touched the door, but no one opened it. When the Levite stepped outside, he acted as if nothing was wrong. "Get up," he told her. "Let's go." She didn't move. He had used her as a shield, left her to suffer, and now expected her to walk away. Her silence in death mirrored her silence in life. The horror off-screen forces readers to imagine the worst. The omission isn't accidental. It forces confrontation with the reality of evil. Not as something distant, but as something ordinary people allow. The Levite's later actions, dismembering her body and sending the pieces to the tribes, were meant to shock. But the greater shock was his indifference. He used her death to rally Israel, but he had done nothing to prevent it. Gibeah exposes a hard truth. Evil doesn't need everyone to participate. It just needs enough people to stay silent. The mob's violence was enabled by the host compromise, the Levite's cowardice, and the city's apathy. This wasn't just ancient history, it was a warning. When good people fail to act, evil thrives. The Levite's reaction is clinical. He doesn't mourn, he doesn't bury her. He turns her body into a message. His outrage isn't for her suffering, it's for the insult to himself. This is the same man who pushed her out to the mob, who ignored every warning sign. Now he acts like a prophet. Rabbinical scholars note the hypocrisy. His moral grandstanding comes only after his own cowardice nearly cost him his life. The tribes react with shock. They say, "Nothing like this has ever happened in Israel." But the truth is worse. The same thing had happened before. In Sodom, Israel knew the story. The difference here is that the predators weren't outsiders. They were Israelites from the tribe of Benjamin. The nation's failure wasn't just violence. It was the normalization of evil within their own ranks. The tribes gathered at Mizpah. They demanded the men of Gibeah be handed over for justice. The tribe of Benjamin refused. What follows is a civil war that nearly wipes out Benjamin. The irony is thick. Israel unites to punish Gibeah's crime, but their solution is more violence. They nearly exterminated a tribe to avenge one woman whose name they never speak. Theological analysis reveals deeper layers. The story comes at the end of Judges, a book that repeats one refrain. There was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. But the problem wasn't just lack of leadership. It was moral decay so deep that crimes like Gibeah could happen without immediate outrage. The Levite wasn't a hero. The tribes weren't righteous. They acted only when the evil became too glaring to ignore. The civil war that follows isn't justice, it's chaos. Israel loses 40,000 men. Benjamin is reduced to 600 survivors. Women are forcibly taken to repopulate the tribe. The cycle of violence spins outward. None of this had to happen. None of it would have happened if someone, the old man, the Levite, the other Benjamites, had refused to tolerate evil sooner. The chilling takeaway isn't just about ancient Israel. It's about how societies crumble. First, they ignore warning signs. Then, they bargain with evil. Finally, they act, too late, too violently, and call it justice. The concubine story isn't history. It's a pattern, a warning. The morning after always comes. The question is whether we'll face what we've allowed, or pretend we don't see the body on the doorstep. The horror of Judges 19 lingers because we recognize it. We've ignored gut feelings to avoid awkwardness, stayed silent when we should have spoken, looked away from uncomfortable truths. The concubine story warns us. Moral collapse begins with small compromises, delaying action, choosing convenience, valuing peace over justice. Her body became a message because her voice was erased in life. Today's sins may not look like Gibeah's, but the pattern remains. Evils tolerated until they can't be ignored. The text leaves us with a challenge. Will we act before the threshold is crossed? When your Gibeah moment comes, which side of the door will you be on? Did this story resonate with you? Show your support by liking, sharing, and subscribing for more content like this.